I never thought repainting my house would ignite a war, especially not with the self-appointed queen of our HOA. All I wanted was to honor my family's history, choosing a classic color that spoke of tradition and resilience. But Karen, with her iron fist and perfectly manicured lawns, saw my deep navy as an act of rebellion, a direct challenge to her meticulously bland vision of our neighborhood. She thought she could find me into submission, force me to conform. She didn't know that I had history on my side, a powerful ally she never saw coming. She didn't know this fight over paint would strip her of every ounce of her power, leaving her fuming, staring across the street at a house she could no longer touch. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The summer sun, a humid blanket typical of a late June afternoon, beat down on me as sweat beaded on my forehead and trickled down my back. But I barely noticed. My gaze was fixed on the freshly painted facade of my grandfather's house. Now, finally, my house. The deep navy blue, rich and almost velvety in the sunlight, contrasted sharply with the crisp, bright white trim, making the architectural details sing. It was exactly as I'd envisioned, a respectful nod to the enduring elegance of homes from the 1920s, a period my grandfather, a quiet man of meticulous taste, had always admired. This house wasn't just a structure. It was a repository of memories, a tangible link to my past. Grandfather Elias, a man who built things, both literal homes and a strong family foundation, had instilled in me a deep appreciation for craftsmanship and permanence. When he passed last year, leaving me this property, I knew I couldn't simply live in it. I had to restore it, to breathe new life into its bones while preserving its soul. The faded, nondescript beige it had worn for decades felt like a betrayal of its inherent character. Navy, a color often seen on grand historical homes, felt right, felt authentic. It felt like home. I stepped back, admiring the transformation. The house stood proud, dignified, a sentinel amongst the more modern, less inspired constructions that dotted the neighborhood. A sense of deep satisfaction bloomed in my chest, a feeling of accomplishment that resonated beyond mere aesthetics. This was more than just a paint job. It was an act of heritage, a tribute. My moment of quiet triumph was abruptly shattered by the clipped sound of high heels clicking rapidly on the asphalt. I braced myself. I knew that sound. It was the distinct cadence of Karen Fulton, the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's aesthetic, and, by extension, our HOA's most zealous enforcer. At 58, Karen was a woman who seemed to exist solely to exert control. Her platinum blonde bob was always immaculate, her designer athleisure wear always pristine, even when she was merely walking her ridiculously fluffy miniature poodle, Fifi. Her perfectly manicured hands, adorned with an absurd amount of large, glittering rings, were perpetually poised to point out perceived infractions. She lived 2 houses down, close enough to witness every perceived deviation from her rigid interpretation of neighborhood perfection. "Mr. Carter!" Her voice, sharp and high-pitched, cut through the quiet hum of the afternoon. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation, delivered with the theatrical flair of a headmistress addressing a recalcitrant student. I turned slowly, schooling my features into a polite, albeit weary, smile. "Karen, lovely day, isn't it?" I offered, perhaps a touch too cheerfully. She ignored my pleasantry, her pale blue eyes, narrowed to slits, raking over my freshly painted house as if it were an affront to all that was decent and proper. Her lips, usually set in a thin, disapproving line, were pursed even tighter, a sign of extreme displeasure. Fifi, cradled in her arm like a furry accessory, let out a series of surprisingly aggressive yaps, as if sensing its owner's outrage. "Lovely for some, perhaps," she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain, "but not for those of us who appreciate the established harmony of our community." What, pray tell, is the meaning of this? Her heavily ringed hand, trembling slightly with indignation, gestured wildly at my beautiful navy house. I felt a familiar ripple of irritation. This, Karen, is my home, and I've repainted it. Quite a transformation, don't you think? It's a very traditional color scheme, actually, for a house of this period. I tried to keep my tone even, but a subtle edge of defiance crept in. I had done my research, meticulously. Karen scoffed, a theatrical sound that ended in a dramatic sniff. Traditional? Mr. Carter, Willow Creek prides itself on its contemporary yet tasteful palette. Beige, cream, a delicate shade of sage perhaps, but navy? And such a deep, oppressive navy. It's entirely too bold. It sticks out like a sore thumb. It's a complete eyesore, a blight upon our otherwise pristine streetscape. My patience, a finite resource, was rapidly depleting. Karen, with all due respect, I believe the covenants state that paint colors must be harmonious with the surrounding architecture and not excessively garish or disruptive. Deep. Navy is hardly garish, and it's certainly harmonious with the historical style of this house. My grandfather built this home in the 1930s, a time when such rich colors were quite common. I emphasized the historical context, hoping to appeal to some sense of reason, however faint, within her. Her jaw tightened, a vein throbbing faintly in her temple. She was not a woman swayed by reason when her personal aesthetic was challenged. The rules are interpreted by the HOA board, Mr. Carter, and I happen to be on that board. My interpretation, and I dare say, the interpretation of the entire board, will be that this color is non-traditional. It falls outside the approved palette, and as such, she paused for dramatic effect, extracting a pristine HOA-branded notepad and a silver pen from her designer handbag. It is subject to a fine and remediation immediately. My eyes narrowed. A fine? Karen, you haven't even sent me a preliminary notice. I followed all the procedures. I submitted my architectural review request weeks ago, which was, I recall, vague on specifics regarding the exact shade of navy, and the board has every right to object post-application if the execution deviates from the spirit of the guidelines. This, Mr. Carter, deviates dramatically. You will receive a formal notice tomorrow. Consider this your verbal warning. She scribbled something on her pad with a flourish, then snapped it shut. And let me be quite clear, Mr. Carter. If this monstrosity is not repainted to a more appropriate, acceptable hue within 30 days, the fines will escalate daily, and we will explore all available legal options to ensure compliance. She turned on her heel, her poodle still yapping, and clicked away, leaving me standing there, the satisfying blue of my house now tinged with the bitter taste of bureaucratic absurdity. My chest tightened, not just with anger, but with a cold resolve. Karen Fulton had just underestimated me. She thought she could steamroll me, just like she had countless other residents who had dared to plant an unapproved flower or leave a garbage can out too early. But this wasn't just about paint to me. This was about my grandfather's legacy, about my home, about a principle. And I wasn't about to let Karen Fulton, or her little HOA kingdom, dictate the soul of a house that had stood proud for nearly a century. This was far from over. This was just the beginning. The deep navy, far from being a blight, was about to become a declaration of war. The formal notice arrived 2 days later, a crisp, official-looking envelope tucked into my mailbox, its contents as predictable as Karen's disdain. It detailed a fine of $50 per day, retroactive to the day of her theatrical proclamation, and a 30-day deadline to repaint the house to an approved, harmonious color, or face escalating penalties and ably. Legal action. $50 a day. That could quickly add up to $1,500, and then more. It was clear Karen wasn't just looking for compliance. She was looking to make an example of me. I held the letter in my hand, the official HOA seal mocking me with its bland authority. My initial frustration had cooled, replaced by a simmering determination. This wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly a factor. It was about principle. It was about my right to define my home, especially when my definition was rooted in genuine historical accuracy. My grandfather had purchased this house in 1935, a sturdy, pre-war construction that exuded classic charm. Its original blueprints, carefully preserved in a dusty box in the attic, showed a deeper, richer color palette. This was a house with a story, a heritage, far beyond the narrow modern interpretations of Karen Fulton's HOA. Instead of calling Karen, which would have been as productive as arguing with a brick wall, I decided to consult my own legal counsel. I called Marcus Thorne, a shrewd, no-nonsense attorney who had handled some corporate contracts for me in the past. Marcus was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his utterly unflappable demeanor. He listened patiently as I recounted Karen's public dressing down, the fine, and my conviction that my chosen paint color was historically appropriate. "So, you're saying this navy, it's not just a personal preference, but it aligns with the home's original character?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and deliberate over the phone. "Exactly," I confirmed, a surge of optimism rising within me. My grandfather actually mentioned the original color in some of his old journals. He described it as a midnight blue with stark white accents. I've seen old photographs, too, though they're black and white, of course. But the darkness of the shade is evident. This house was built to echo the grander, more formal homes of its era. They weren't all beige and cream back then, Marcus. In fact, many were quite vibrant. "Interesting," Marcus mused. "And the HOA covenants, word for word, on paint colors?" I recited them. "Colors must be harmonious with the surrounding architecture and not excessively garish or disruptive. That's it. No specific palette, no detailed swatches or numbers, just that vague subjective language." "Subjective indeed," Marcus agreed, "which means interpretation is key. And if your interpretation is supported by historical fact, it strengthens your position considerably. This isn't merely about personal taste. It's about historical integrity versus a modern, arguably arbitrary, aesthetic preference." "So, what's our move?" I asked, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "First," Marcus explained, "we gather evidence. Dig up those journals, those old photos, anything that demonstrates the historical context of that midnight blue. Second, we explore the possibility of leveraging local preservation laws. Many cities, even suburban ones like Willow Creek, have provisions for protecting properties with historical significance. If your house can be declared a local landmark, or even just recognized as a heritage site, the HOA's power over its exterior aesthetics effectively vanishes. Preservation supersedes HOA covenants." The idea hit me with the force of a revelation. A local landmark. The thought sent a thrill through me, far more satisfying than merely winning a paint dispute. This would be a victory for authenticity, for history, for my grandfather's legacy, and a colossal defeat for Karen's tyranny. "How do we do that?" I asked, my voice eager. "It's a process," Marcus cautioned. "You'll need to contact the Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society. They'll have an application process, criteria for what constitutes a landmark, and typically a board review. We'll need to make a compelling case for the house's historical and architectural significance, beyond just the paint color. Its age, its original design, any notable features, its connection to your grandfather as an early resident of the community. If they deem it worthy, they recommend it to the city council for official designation. It can be lengthy, involves public hearings, community input. But if it goes through, Karen Fulton will find herself powerless." That night, I began my deep dive into the house's history. I unearthed my grandfather's meticulously kept journals, dusty leather-bound books filled with elegant cursive. In one entry from 1936, he mused about the choice of exterior paint. Settled on a deep, almost purplish navy for the siding, with stark white accents. A bold choice, some might say. But it truly brings out the lines of the colonial revival style, a proper nod to the sturdy homes of our forefathers. Feels like a true reflection of permanence. My heart swelled as I read his words, a validation from across the decades. He had faced his own Karen Fultons then, perhaps, people who questioned his bold choices. I also found old sepia-toned photographs tucked between the pages of a family album. One, taken shortly after the house was completed, clearly showed the dark, rich hue of the siding. It wasn't beige. It wasn't cream. It was, unmistakably, a deep, commanding color. The following morning, armed with my evidence and a newfound zeal, I called the Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society. A pleasant-sounding woman named Eleanor Vance answered. When I explained my predicament, omitting Karen's name but describing the HOA dispute and my desire to preserve the historical integrity of my home, her voice warmed with interest. A 1930s colonial revival in its original condition is quite rare in Willow Creek, Mr. Carter, she said, her tone appreciative. Most have been significantly altered. We would be very interested in reviewing your application. We prioritize homes that retain their architectural integrity and contribute to the historical narrative of our town. I felt a surge of triumph. This was it. This was my path. I spent the next few days meticulously compiling my application. Copies of my grandfather's journal entries, annotated with the relevant passages, magnified prints of the old photographs, architectural drawings of the house's original design, and a detailed narrative outlining its significance to Willow Creek's early development. I even included historical data on popular paint colors of the 1930s, demonstrating that deep blues and greens were indeed common for certain architectural styles, directly refuting Karen's claim of non-traditional tones. I submitted the comprehensive packet to the Preservation Society, a thick file bursting with history. The clock was ticking on Karen's 30-day ultimatum, but I felt a quiet confidence. She had initiated a war over paint, and I was about to deploy a far more potent weapon: history itself. This wasn't just about winning a petty HOA dispute. It was about protecting a legacy, and in doing so, reclaiming a piece of my own identity. The battle was set, and I was ready. Weeks passed with a strange duality. On one hand, life at home settled into a comfortable rhythm. My newly painted deep navy house, standing tall and proud, was a constant source of quiet satisfaction. It felt right, rooted, a true reflection of the history it held within its walls. On the other hand, the tension with Karen Fulton simmered just beneath the surface, occasionally bubbling over in passive-aggressive skirmishes. She would march Fifi past my house, her head held impossibly high, her gaze fixed rigidly forward, as if the offensive Navy structure might somehow contaminate her peripheral vision. Sometimes, she'd park her SUV directly across from my driveway, ostensibly to check her mail or take a phone call, but always positioned to allow her to glare at my house with undisguised venom. Her husband, a mild-mannered man named Richard, who seemed perpetually intimidated by Karen's formidable presence, would occasionally offer me a sympathetic, apologetic shrug if we crossed paths at the neighborhood mailbox, a silent acknowledgement of his wife's unreasonable crusade. The HOA notices continued to arrive, initially the daily $50 fines, then an escalating $100 a day, piling up into a theoretical mountain of debt. I forwarded each one to Marcus, who calmly assured me they were merely empty threats, that the legal process would take time, and that we had a solid case once the Preservation Society made its move. "Just keep those, Devin," he'd say, his voice unperturbed. "They're building our narrative of harassment." My focus, however, was on the Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society. After I submitted my meticulous application, a formal review process began. Eleanor Vance, the pleasant woman I'd spoken with, became my main point of contact. She informed me that the Society's board would review my submission, and if it met their initial criteria, a site visit would be scheduled, followed by a public hearing. The site visit happened on a breezy Tuesday morning. Eleanor arrived with 2 other board members, a distinguished-looking architect named Mr. Henderson and a local historian, Dr. Aris. I walked them through the house, pointing out original features, the unique 1930s built-ins, the solid oak floors, the intricate crown molding. I showed them my grandfather's journals, letting them read the passages detailing his vision for the house, including the midnight blue exterior. They examined the old photographs, nodding in appreciation. "Remarkable preservation, Mr. Carter," Mr. Henderson commented, his eyes scanning the detailed craftsmanship. "Many homes of this era have had their character stripped away by misguided renovations. This one retains its soul." Dr. Aris, leafing through the journals, looked up at me, a warm smile on his face. "Your grandfather was clearly a man of foresight, and this house truly contributes to the architectural history of Willow Creek. Its style, its construction, its original palette, it's a living piece of our town's past." Eleanor, her usual calm demeanor now tinged with palpable excitement, confirmed their positive initial assessment. "This is precisely the kind of property we aim to protect, Mr. Carter. It's an authentic representation of a significant period in Willow Creek's development. We will recommend its immediate consideration for buy. Landmark status to the City Council." Their words filled me with a sense of vindication, a powerful surge of hope. This wasn't just about paint anymore. It was about validating my grandfather's vision, about recognizing the intrinsic value of history in a world too often obsessed with the new and the bland. A few days later, I received the official notice from the Preservation Society. My application for local landmark status had been unanimously approved by their board and would be formally presented to the Willow Creek City Council for a public hearing and final vote in 2 weeks. The letter detailed the date and time of the council meeting. I immediately forwarded the good news to Marcus. "Excellent, Devin." Marcus's voice was genuinely pleased. "This puts us in a very strong position. The City Council almost always defers to the Historical Preservation Society's recommendations on these matters. Once it's designated, the HOA has no jurisdiction over the exterior." The thought of Karen's reaction when she learned of this brought a grim smile to my face. She was about to be hoisted by her own petard, her desire for control leading to her complete loss of it. Word, as it always does in small towns, began to filter through the neighborhood. Richard, Karen's husband, caught me at the grocery store a few days before the council meeting. He looked more harried than usual, his brow furrowed with concern. "Devin," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, as he pushed his shopping cart, laden with organic kale and gluten-free crackers, past mine. "Karen's, well, she's heard about your application with the Historical Society." He winced, as if anticipating an explosion. "She's not happy. She's calling everyone, mobilizing residents for the council meeting. She sees it as a direct attack on the HOA's authority." I suppressed a sigh. Of course she did. For Karen, everything was a battle for dominance. "Richard, I'm just trying to protect my property and its history. It's not an attack on the HOA. It's a matter of historical preservation." He just nodded vaguely, looking over his shoulder as if Karen might materialize from behind a display of artisanal cheeses. "Just be prepared. She's pulling out all the stops. She's even claiming you're doing this out of spite, to undermine the community's aesthetic standards." The accusation of spite, though containing a grain of truth regarding my current feelings towards Karen, missed the larger point entirely. This was about more than petty revenge. It was about justice, about the principle of historical authenticity. but I knew arguing with Richard would be pointless. The night of the city council meeting arrived, thick with a palpable tension. The council chambers, usually sparsely attended, were packed. A sea of familiar faces, neighbors from Willow Creek, filled the seats. And there, in the front row, sat Karen, resplendent in a tailored power suit, her posture rigid. Fifi nowhere in sight, thankfully. She was flanked by several other HOA board members, all wearing expressions of grim determination. Her eyes met mine across the room, a challenge, a promise of battle. I took my seat a few rows back, next to Marcus, who gave me a reassuring nod. The air hummed with anticipation. This was it. The culmination of weeks of preparation, of standing firm against Karen's relentless pressure. This wasn't just a battle over paint. It was a showdown between bureaucratic control and historical reverence, between subjective aesthetics and objective heritage. And I was ready to argue for the latter with every fiber of my being. The weight of my grandfather's legacy, the quiet dignity of his home, rested on my shoulders. I wouldn't let him down. The city council meeting commenced with the usual bureaucratic formalities, but an undercurrent of palpable tension permeated the chamber. When the agenda item for historical landmark designation, 1422 Elmwood Drive, was called, the room seemed to hold its breath. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of nervousness and fierce resolve. Marcus nudged me, a silent cue to step forward. I approached the podium, the bright lights of the chamber feeling like a spotlight. My gaze swept across the faces in the audience, landing briefly on Karen, whose expression was a theatrical mask of disdain. I took a deep breath, clutching the file of my grandfather's journals and old photographs. "Good evening, Mayor, council members, and residents of Willow Creek," I began, my voice steady, projecting calm confidence despite the butterflies in my stomach. "My name is Devin Carter, and I am the owner of the property at 1422 Elmwood Drive. Tonight, I am here to request the formal designation of my home as a local historical landmark." I then launched into my presentation, carefully laying out my case. I spoke about my grandfather, Elias Carter, a respected early resident of Willow Creek, and his meticulous craftsmanship in building the colonial revival home in 1935. I highlighted the architectural significance of the house, its retention of original features rare in the town, and its contribution to the historical tapestry of Willow Creek. I cited my grandfather's journal entries, reading the passage about his deliberate choice of the deep, almost purplish navy paint, emphasizing his artistic vision and his desire for a true reflection of raw permanence. I passed around the magnified copies of the old sepia photographs, showing the house in its original, darker hue. "This is not merely a matter of personal preference, council members," I stated, my voice gaining conviction. "This is about respecting the authentic heritage of this property, a heritage that reflects a specific period in Willow Creek's development. The paint color, far from being non-traditional or garish, is historically accurate and integral to the house's architectural identity." I paused, looking directly at the council members. The Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society has already reviewed and unanimously recommended this designation, recognizing the profound historical and architectural value of 1422 Elmwood Drive. I concluded by reiterating the benefits of landmark status. Not only would it protect the historical integrity of the property for future generations, but it would also enhance Willow Creek's cultural landscape. I thanked them for their time and stepped back from the podium, feeling the weight of the moment. The mayor, a jovial woman named Mayor Thompson, nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for a very thorough and compelling presentation. We also have a representative from the Historical Preservation Society here tonight. Eleanor Vance, would you like to add anything?" Eleanor, poised and articulate, stepped forward. She briefly reiterated the Society's endorsement, emphasizing the rigorous review process and the unanimous vote of their board. Mr. Carter's home is a truly exceptional example of 1930s colonial revival architecture, remarkably preserved. Its designation as a landmark would be a significant asset to Willow Creek. Then, the mayor opened the floor for public comments. And, like a coiled viper, Karen Fulton struck. She strode to the podium, her back ramrod straight, her expression radiating indignation. She practically snatched the microphone from the stand. "Mayor, council members, fellow residents," Karen began, her voice shrill, barely concealing her fury. "I stand before you tonight not to speak against historical preservation, but to speak for the integrity of our community standards. This entire charade is nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt by Mr. Carter to circumvent the legitimate authority of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." She glared at me, then swept her gaze across the council. Mr. Carter chose a paint color that is, by any modern standard, too bold, non-traditional, and frankly, an eyesore in our carefully curated neighborhood. The HOA covenants are clear. Paint colors must be harmonious. This navy house is anything but. It is an affront to our property values, a disruptive anomaly in our serene aesthetic. Her voice rose in pitch, bordering on a screech. He submitted a vague application, then proceeded to flaunt our rules, painting his house in defiance of our community standards. And now, rather than rectify his mistake, he is attempting to weaponize history to escape accountability. This is an act of pure spite, an attempt to undermine the very fabric of our self-governing community. She launched into a tirade about declining property values, about the slippery slope of allowing residents to flaunt HOA rules, about the sanctity of their community aesthetic. She presented no evidence, no historical data, only impassioned rhetoric fueled by personal vendetta. She brought up past, minor HOA infractions she had personally quashed, trying to establish her authority and paint me as a rebel without a cause. Her speech was long, rambling, and increasingly unhinged. Several residents in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Even some of the HOA board members flanking her seemed to squirm in their seats. Finally, the mayor gently interrupted her. "Thank you, Ms. Fulton. Your points regarding community standards are noted. Are there any other residents who wish to speak?" A few others, clearly allies of Karen, spoke briefly, echoing her sentiments, though none with her level of venom. They spoke vaguely of neighborhood character and maintaining standards, but offered little in the way of concrete arguments against historical preservation. Then, to my surprise, a few residents, some I barely knew, stood up to speak in my favor. One, an older woman named Mrs. Gavel, who lived a few streets over, spoke softly but firmly. "I remember Mr. Carter's grandfather, Elias. He was a fine man, and that house, it's always been a standout. I actually remember it being a darker color when I was a girl. This new paint, it looks just like I remember it. It's lovely, and if it's truly historical, why shouldn't we protect it?" Her words, gentle and sincere, seemed to cut through Karen's bluster. Another neighbor, a young couple who had recently moved to Willow Creek, spoke about their appreciation for the older homes in the area and the charm they brought. "We moved here precisely because of the mix of old and new. We think Mr. Carter's house looks wonderful. It's got character. If it's historically accurate, it should be celebrated, not fined." The testimonies, both for and against, created a charged atmosphere. When the public comment session concluded, the mayor turned to the city council. "Council members, you've heard the arguments. We have the recommendation from the Historical Preservation Society, which is a strong endorsement. We also understand the concerns raised by the HOA. This is a matter of balancing community standards with historical preservation." A brief discussion ensued amongst the council members, quiet murmurs and nods. Then, the mayor called for a vote. "All those in favor of designating 1422 Elmwood Drive as a local historical landmark, please signify by saying aye." A chorus of eyes filled the room, strong and clear. I counted them, my heart pounding. A vast majority. Opposed? A few hesitant nays were uttered, notably from Karen and her immediate allies. But they were drowned out by the affirmative votes. Mayor Thompson smiled, her gaze meeting mine. The motion passes. 1422 Elmwood Drive is officially designated as a local historical landmark, effective immediately. She then looked directly at Karen. This designation means that the exterior of the property is now subject to the oversight of the Historical Preservation Society, not the HOA. Any future exterior changes must be approved by the Society, ensuring its continued historical integrity. The HOA no longer has jurisdiction over exterior paint color or any other exterior aesthetic. A stunned silence fell over Karen's section of the room. Her mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut, her face slowly turning a mottled shade of crimson. Her eyes, fixed on me, burned with a furious, speechless outrage. The triumphant grin I had been suppressing finally broke across my face. It wasn't just a victory, it was a total, undeniable rout. Karen Fulton, the HOA queen, had lost all control, and her face, in that moment, was absolutely priceless. My house, my deep Navy house, stood not just as a symbol of my grandfather's legacy, but as a monument to her spectacular defeat. The war over paint was over, and history, quite literally, had won. The City Council's decision reverberated through Willow Creek like a small, satisfying earthquake. For me, it was a profound vindication, a tangible triumph over arbitrary control. For Karen Fulton, it was a public humiliation, a direct challenge to her once unquestioned authority. The moment the mayor's declaration echoed through the council chambers, I saw the exact instant Karen's meticulously constructed world crumbled. Her face, a mask of fury and disbelief, was etched with a raw, unadulterated defeat that was almost poetic in its intensity. She stormed out of the meeting, her HOA allies trailing behind her like deflated balloons, leaving a palpable silence in their wake. The days that followed were surprisingly peaceful, at least for me. The HOA notices, which had been arriving daily like clockwork, suddenly ceased. Marcus confirmed that the city had formally notified the HOA board of the landmark designation and its implications. My house was officially free from their aesthetic dictates. It was a strange sensation, this newfound freedom, after weeks of subtle harassment. I found myself humming as I worked in my garden, a lightness in my step that hadn't been there in months. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, carried on the invisible currents of gossip and curiosity. Most residents seemed to react with a quiet, almost gleeful satisfaction. Many had their own stories of Karen's petty tyrannies, her overbearing interpretations of rules, and her relentless pursuit of uniformity. My victory, therefore, was not just my own, it was a victory for anyone who had ever felt stifled by her iron grip. Richard, Karen's husband, continued his sympathetic nods, now tinged with a look that suggested a permanent state of exasperation. He'd occasionally stop by when Karen was out, offering a brief, awkward conversation about the weather or local sports, a silent apology for his wife's behavior. Life settled into a new rhythm. I continued to work on restoring the interior of the house, enjoying the quiet companionship of my grandfather's journals, each entry offering a deeper insight into his character and his connection to this home. I spent hours in his old study, surrounded by his books, feeling a profound sense of continuity. The deep navy exterior now truly felt like a protective embrace, a vibrant shield against the blandness Karen championed. Karen, however, was not one to simply fade into the background. While the HOA had lost legal control over my property's exterior, she still found ways to express her displeasure. Her house, 2 doors down, became a monument to passive aggression. She started planting rows of shockingly bright, almost neon-colored flowers along her property line facing my house, a garish display of fuchsias and electric yellows that screamed in protest against my deep navy. She installed motion sensor floodlights that seemed to activate specifically when I walked out onto my porch in the evenings, bathing my front yard in an unnatural, harsh glare. She would leave her garbage cans out for an extra day after pickup, positioned awkwardly near my property line. Each act was petty, childish, but designed to irritate. I found myself oddly amused by her antics. They were clear signs of her impotence, her frustration at having lost her grip. I simply ignored the flowers, enjoying the stark contrast they provided, a testament to her unyielding, yet now powerless, opposition. The floodlights? I invested in some high-quality blackout curtains for my living room. The garbage cans? I just learned to walk around them. Her attempts to provoke me were laughably transparent. One afternoon, a few months after the landmark designation, I was out front, pruning an overgrown rose bush near my mailbox. I heard the familiar click-clack of Karen's heels approaching. I braced myself, expecting another thinly veiled insult or a dramatic sigh. But this time, her approach was different. She stopped not at the property line, but directly in front of me, her posture rigid, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Fifi was, thankfully, absent. "Carter!" she spat, her voice low and tight, vibrating with suppressed rage. "This is not over." I straightened up, pruning shears in hand, a slight smile playing on my lips. "Karen, to what do I owe this distinct pleasure? You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so clever, circumventing the rules, making a mockery of everything this community stands for. I simply ensured that my house, a genuine piece of Willow Creek's history, was properly recognized and protected," I replied calmly, deliberately emphasizing the words history and protected. "It was a matter of principle, Karen, my grandfather's legacy, and the historical Preservation Society, along with the city council, agreed." "Principles?" she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You call undermining the HOA, spitting in the face of your neighbor's desire for order and uniformity, principles? You did this out of spite, Carter. Pure, unadulterated spite." Perhaps a little bit of spite now, Karen. After weeks of your unwarranted fines and harassment," I admitted, my smile widening slightly. "But primarily, it was about doing right by this house, about preserving its authentic character, a character that clearly doesn't fit your beige and cream vision of Willow Creek." And now, I paused, letting the full weight of my Kabbalah words land. "The city agrees. Your HOA has no jurisdiction over my paint color, or anything else on the exterior." Her face, already flushed, turned a deeper shade of scarlet. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her expensive rings digging into her palms. You insidious little man," she stammered, clearly struggling to contain her rage. "You think you can just live next door with that thing?" She gestured vaguely at my house, as if it were a contagious disease, "and expect me to just accept it? You will regret this, Carter. Mark my words." "I doubt it, Karen," I said, my voice still calm, almost sympathetic. "I'm quite content with my choice. My house is beautiful, and it's finally being recognized for what it is, a heritage site. And you, well, you get to live right next door to it, every single day." The words were delivered with a casual lightness, but they struck deep. The victory wasn't just in the landmark status, but in the delicious irony that Karen, the self-proclaimed arbiter of taste, was now forced to live in constant, unavoidable proximity to the very thing she found so offensive, yet could do absolutely nothing about. Her powerless rage was a testament to the true scale of her defeat. She stood there, speechless for a moment, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her eyes fixed on me with pure, unadulterated loathing. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped back to her house, her heels clicking a furious rhythm of defeat. I watched her go, a genuine, unburdened laugh escaping my lips. The rosebush still needed pruning, but for the first time in a long time, the work felt light, effortless. My house, bathed in its bold, beautiful navy, stood as a silent, unwavering monument. A landmark, not just for Willow Creek, but for the enduring power of standing your ground, of fighting for what's right, and perhaps, just perhaps, for the simple joy of winning a battle against a self-appointed Karen. The satisfaction was immeasurable. My house, once just a home, was now a symbol, a testament to authenticity in the face of suffocating conformity, and a daily, unyielding reminder to Karen Fulton of her utter and complete lack of control. The success of the Historic Homes Tour solidified my house's place as a cherished landmark in Willow Creek. The local newspaper featured a full-page spread, complete with stunning photos of the deep navy exterior and interior details, alongside an interview with me and Eleanor Vance. The article subtly highlighted the controversy that had led to the landmark designation, painting Karen Fulton, though unnamed, as the antagonist of the piece, a figure attempting to stifle historical preservation. The online comment section buzzed with support for my home and thinly veiled criticism of overzealous HOAs. Karen, predictably, went into a deeper, more profound funk. Her yard became even more of a visual spectacle of protest. She acquired an inflatable, 7-foot-tall pink unicorn lawn ornament that she positioned strategically so its large, glittery horn pointed directly at my house. She replaced her chimes with even louder, larger ones that clanged like a maritime disaster every time a breeze stirred. Her efforts were so over the top that they began to attract curious onlookers, people who would drive slowly past our street, pointing and sometimes chuckling. My house, with its quiet dignity, became the calm center of this bizarre neighborhood circus, a deliberate counterpoint to her escalating absurdities. I often found myself simply observing her, a sense of detached amusement growing with each new addition to her protest garden. Her antics, rather than annoying me, only highlighted her own frustration and impotence. The house stood proud, its navy exterior absorbing the harsh glares and clanging chimes, seeming to exude an even deeper sense of dignified defiance. I continued my restoration work, pouring my energy into the interior, polishing the original hardwood floors, stripping away layers of old wallpaper to reveal intricate plasterwork, and updating the electrical and plumbing systems with meticulous care. Each nail hammered, each brushstroke applied, was an act of quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of space and history. One morning, while I was out on my porch, enjoying a cup of coffee and the crisp autumn air, a middle-aged couple I didn't recognize pulled up in front of Karen's house. They had a realtor with them. I watched, intrigued, as they walked around her yard, their expressions shifting from polite interest to visible dismay as they took in the cacophony of gnomes, flamingos, wind chimes, and the giant pink unicorn. They exchanged bewildered glances, and I could almost hear their silent questions. The realtor, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tried to point out some features of Karen's meticulously maintained exterior, but their eyes kept drifting to the bizarre lawn ornaments. After a few minutes, the couple got back into their car, shook their heads at the realtor, and drove away without even entering Karen's house. The realtor lingered for a moment, sighing heavily, before also driving off. A slow smile spread across my face. It seemed Karen's protest garden was backfiring, literally driving away potential buyers for her own property. Her attempts to make my house an eyesore were, ironically, making her house unsellable. A few days later, I saw "Ah, for sale" sign discreetly placed on Karen's lawn, almost hidden behind a particularly bushy patch of neon fuchsias. It seemed her rage and her attempts at retaliation were costing her more than just her pride. The thought brought a quiet satisfaction, not malicious joy, but a sense of karmic balance. She had sought to devalue my property instead. She had devalued her own. Life in my now famous deep navy house took on a comfortable rhythm. I found a new sense of community, connecting with neighbors who appreciated history and independent spirit. The Historical Preservation Society invited me to speak at various events, sharing my story as an example of successful preservation and advocating for similar efforts in other parts of Willow Creek. My art, once a personal passion, now found a new purpose in expressing the beauty of historical architecture and the resilience of a home. I even started sketching some of the older homes in town, contemplating a series that would highlight their unique characters, a project born directly from my experience. Months later, as winter reluctantly gave way to the first hints of spring, a new set of buyers appeared at Karen's house. This time, it was a young family with 2 small children, clearly eager to find a home. I watched from my living room window as they approached Karen's yard. The children, perhaps fascinated by the sheer volume of kitsch, ran towards the pink unicorn and the gnomes, laughing. The parents, however, looked less impressed. They exchanged looks, then whispered to the realtor. They did go inside, but they didn't stay long. They emerged, looking subdued, and within minutes they were gone. The "for sale" sign remained. It became clear that Karen was struggling to sell her house. The constant stream of potential buyers coming to view my landmark property, admiring its classic beauty, only highlighted the jarring contrast with her own, now infamous, yard. She was trapped, literally living next door to her greatest defeat, unable to endure the daily reminder of her loss of control. The very thing she despised, my deep navy house, was now a celebrated local landmark, featured in brochures, admired by tourists, and standing as a beacon of authenticity in a neighborhood she had tried to homogenize. One unexpectedly warm afternoon in early April, I was repotting some daffodils on my front porch, preparing for spring. The "for sale" sign was still in Karen's yard, faded from the winter sun. Karen emerged from her house, her posture slumped, her usual crisp attire replaced by a worn tracksuit. She walked slowly to the mailbox, pulled out a few letters, and then, for the first time since the council meeting, she paused. She didn't glare at my house. She didn't turn away in disgust. She simply looked at it. Her gaze swept over the deep navy walls, the gleaming white trim, the sturdy architecture that spoke of timelessness. She looked at the fresh daffodils I was planting, a tiny splash of yellow against the dark blue. Her shoulders, usually held so rigidly, seemed to droop. She looked tired, defeated in a way that went beyond mere anger. It was the look of someone who had lost a battle she never truly understood, who had sacrificed her own peace for a futile struggle against something she could not control. She stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure framed by her absurd lawn ornaments. Then, without a word, without a glance at me, she turned and walked slowly back into her house, the soft click of her footsteps a stark contrast to the aggressive click-clack I was so used to hearing. It was a silent surrender, a moment of profound, quiet capitulation. The next day, the "for sale" sign was gone from Karen's yard. A new, much smaller sign had replaced it. Sold. A few days later, a moving truck pulled up. I watched from my window as movers carefully packed her belongings. Karen supervised, her face still drawn, but devoid of the usual fury. She didn't look at my house. She didn't look at me. She simply focused on the task at hand, the arduous process of dismantling a life she had clearly chosen to abandon. As the moving truck pulled away, laden with the detritus of her defeat, The sheer quiet that descended upon the street was almost deafening. The garish gnomes and the pink unicorn were gone, replaced by an empty, slightly overgrown lawn. My deep navy house stood bathed in the afternoon sun, a beacon of peace, its dignity finally unchallenged. I stepped out onto my porch, taking a deep breath of the fresh, unburdened air. The battle was truly over. My house, my grandfather's legacy, was safe, a recognized heritage site. And Karen, the HOA queen, had been forced to leave, unable to endure the daily reminder of her spectacular loss of control. It was a victory not just for me, but for the principle that authenticity, history, and individuality could, and should, prevail over bland conformity. The quiet hum of the afternoon was now filled with the gentle whisper of a story completed, a tale of triumph over tyranny, etched forever in the rich, bold color of my landmark home.